Stephanie Lemo, Principal of Lemo Architecture and Design and Chair of AIA Austin's Women in Architecture Committee for 2022. This year, we decided to focus our profile series on some of the women I find most inspiring in our architecture community. The pandemic has been tough on everyone, and because women have been disproportionately affected, I felt that we were all in great need of something both upbeat and motivational. It is important to celebrate these incredible women as the profession begins to challenge the underrepresentation of women in the field. There is a clear lack of diversity, so we want to do anything we can to inspire other women to pursue or continue in the architectural profession.
Hi, I am Karina Cole. I am the owner and principal architect at Restructure Studio, and I am the chair-elect for Women in Architecture Committee at AIA Austin for the year 2022. I love that we chose to highlight the topic of inspiration for our profile series this year. After the myriad of events that have occurred over the past 2 years, all of us have experienced a heightened level of stress, both at home and in our professional lives. It is the perfect time to hear from these amazing women about what inspires them to continue to be great designers and leaders in our community. I especially love to hear that so many of the interviews talk about family as a big source of inspiration. As we move into 2023 and prepare to face the challenges yet to come, I hope that we can all draw inspiration from our own families, both our families at home as well as our families at work and in our community.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Chavez, and I am the project manager for Restructure Studio and a subcommittee chair for the 2022 Profiles Video Series. We launched this subcommittee in late 2020 to give our community leaders a voice. This year, we focused on the topic of inspiration, in which we asked each interviewee where do they draw inspiration from, in what ways do they inspire or support other women in the profession, and out of all the important issues that their profession faces, which is the most meaningful to them and why, among many other questions. Please enjoy the compilation videos for all the conversations we recorded this year.
I actually was hoping you would ask that. Okay. What inspired you to be an architect?
Cut and dried answer to that one. What inspired me to study architecture?
Okay. To be an architect.
Yeah.
I grew up obviously in the 60s and 70s. What I saw, obviously, through all the turmoil of the Vietnam War, turmoil of what was happening after the kind of first blush and excitement of integration. The issue was what was I going to do with my life? There was a great promise. I mean, if you think about hippies and love and we're going to all get along, there was this great promise. My parents had integrated a community outside of Boston. They were very, and they had great dreams for me. I needed to go to Harvard. Well, I didn't want to go to Harvard because Harvard was only 20 miles away from the house and my mother could get there. So I went to Yale. So that was great. They were really excited about, okay, you can be part of the new class of women that go to Yale. So that was okay. But I was always expected to do something, to be better than my parents, and I really didn't know how I was going to be better than my parents. And I wanted to be a graphic artist. And I went to Yale and actually got very much into the theory of graphic arts. But I also saw just the turmoil of society. There was the trials, it was the shootings at Kent State, at Jackson State. It was the Vietnam War protests. It was seeing some of the breakdown. We still had school segregation. So I felt I needed to do something that was of use as well.
I am not one of those architects that knew this was always what I wanted to do. Oh, when she was little, she picked up a pen and started sketching, and then we always knew, like, no, that wasn't my path. I have an undergrad degree in philosophy. I loved writing, I loved reading, I loved research, and I kind of backed backed into architecture, I sort of fell into it. My stepdad is a home designer, and so I went to architecture grad school to apprentice with him and maybe take over his business. He has this sort of home design firm in Louisiana that does sort of, it's sort of tract home in these big developments. So I was like, well, I'll go to grad school for architecture, I'll learn AutoCAD, I'll quit grad school, and I'll go work for him. But of course, what happens? Like, you start grad school, you get into studio, you realize that architecture is so much more interesting and complicated than you ever would have imagined. And I was hooked. That was it.
So in my family, everyone, except my parents who are statisticians, everyone else is an architect or an engineer. And so I always, growing up, thought I would be an architect. I always had summer jobs at the family firm. But in high school, I wanted to be different, right? Because I was a teenager. And I really like chemistry. So I decided I was going to go and study chemical engineering. And as soon as I started it, I realized that that was not for me. There was not a lot of creativity, which in hindsight, there probably was, right, eventually. But I realized that really architecture was always something that I wanted to do. Going back to the first question about what inspires me and ballet, it's almost the way my brain works. The detail and the precision combined with the creativity, architecture seemed like the best option for me.
I grew up in India, and India was heavily influenced by Le Corbusier. The city of Chandigarh is a huge, that was where our cousins lived, and we would frequently visit it, and every time we would visit it, my father said, "Did you know?" And I would just roll my eyes like, yes. And then he would just keep telling me more and more about it. And he would say, like, you know, my father is an engineer. He's a railway engineer, so master planning and all of that is sort of his forte. And so he said, you know, whenever someone comes across an issue in the city, and they open up the old plans that he drew, the solution's always right there. And so I was like, that is amazing that someone could think about it like that far ahead. So that sort of planted the seed, I think. But then when I came here to the US, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. And again, my father gave me this slight nudge and he said, why don't you try architecture? You might like it. And sure enough, yeah, I took the first class. I was like, I'm in love with it.
I started off in engineering. My father is an engineer. A lot of the people in my family are engineers. I had a mother that was an artist. And so I've always had sort of one foot in each world. And I think I thought I had to make a choice at some point. But I think the real gift of practicing architecture is that you're in both fields at one time. There's something about solving problems from a poetic side as well as a technical side and coming to a really elegant solution for a problem set that comes from architecture. It's a different way of thinking about things.
I realized that I wanted to study architecture actually early on in junior high. I went to a career fair at my junior high school, and there was a table with an architecture firm and a beautiful model, and the woman that was standing at the table was telling me that architecture was a great profession for women and for people that liked art but also liked math, and those were subjects that I both were interested in. And I think just hearing her talk and seeing this model, just immediately it clicked for me. And
I had gotten a degree in cultural anthropology, which was my love. But I learned very quickly, I moved to Manhattan and I couldn't even get a job teaching kindergartners in the Museum of Natural History as a guide. They were giving those to PhD candidates. So, and I really wanted a career, I knew that. And in those days it was kind of like doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. I mean, there wasn't, the choices, or teacher. And I didn't feel like, I wouldn't feel drawn to that. And a friend of mine had gone to architecture school, a woman, the year before. She didn't continue, but it just like planted a seed, and I could always do little cartoons, and I could draw, sort of. And I was fascinated by how people lived on Earth. And so it was really easy. I think cultural anthropology is the best platform for an architect to have. It's not the most I'm not the most technically inclined, but I am fascinated by just life on Earth and how we live it as humans in the different ways.
When it came time to figure out if I was going to college and what I wanted to do, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I probably had the fairly typical skills that you now might look back and think are good to be an architect. I was doing math and I was doing art and I liked to write. But I knew that I didn't want to do any of the subjects that I had studied in my final years of high school in the UK. And so I had a book of college courses and I opened it at A and went down the list and ran into architecture. I was like, huh.
For me, I've been just incredibly lucky and fortunate enough to have a husband that has been very supportive of my career, has at many times taken on the lion's share of what goes on in the house. There's certainly the predictable things like having meals on the table at a certain time because my schedule would get very erratic, or my quote-unquote getting the job done would go way into the middle of the night.
It's an absolute necessity, a healthy work-life balance. I've worked for firms that don't prioritize that, and I've learned a lot from that. I think that if we're able to build an environment where people truly, genuinely feel like they can put it down at the end of the day and get back to the other parts of their life that are important, then we've done a good job. I hope that we're all, especially in post-pandemic, really striving to create the kind of environments that we want to work in. And to do that, it means putting like mental health and an ability to separate yourself from work, put that forward as an absolute priority.
The one thing that I am currently at peace with is knowing that there'll be 3 days a week where work is just crazy, and then there'll be 2 days a week where I can go pick up my kids and be with them during the afternoon and not have to worry about work. And to me, that's a pretty good place to be. So I see that as my current work-life balance.
First of all, I don't really believe in live-work balance. I think that the philosophy that you could perfectly balance two things together and they would always be working in harmony is a bit of a fallacy. Much more interested in diving into whatever we're doing with 100% energy and passion. So I think that if you are mindful about how much time you're spending away from one thing and not too much time away from it, you have a much better performance overall.
I'm a sole practitioner that mostly works from home, so this flexibility enables me to build the projects that I'm proud of, but also have a social life and spend time with my family. Sometimes I work late nights and weekends. Other times, if a friend comes to town or if something comes up, it's not hard for me to take off a few hours during a work day or to take off a work day if I need to.
I don't love the term work-life balance. I've always had a hard time with that term. To me, the two are really connected. I don't separate my work from my life because my work is a very important part of my life. I don't feel like I stop being an architect to be a mom, and I don't stop being a mom to be an architect or anything else that I am. To me, it's really about being satisfied in everything that I am doing and all aspects of my life, to make sure that when I am working on one thing, I am focused on that thing and I am doing the best that I can in that.
Well, what I have learned about work-life balance is that I knew nothing about it. I thought it was all about work. So I had a very career-dominated life up until about 5 years ago, and just made a conscious decision to reduce time on projects. And I think the most important thing I want to say is that I think you have to always realize that your work-life balance is going to change. There's not one formula that stays with you your whole life.
The one thing that I've realized over time, sort of to that point, is I'm not sure that ideals exist when it comes to work-life balance that are general, because each of us exists in our own sort of distinct set of relationships, our own distinct ecosystem that lends itself to different possibilities or desires of balance, and that's changing over time as well. So at this particular point in my life, just speaking for myself, I'm in the juggle of running a small business with raising small kids, and I kind of love the slightly unmanaged chaos of it.
Issues that we're facing right now are global and they're existential. And if we do not face them on a global and realize that our very existence depends on it, we're not going to get anywhere. I think architects, both by the way they are trained to think, by what they can actually do, are key to this. So I think those are very important for our profession. And this is not to say that every answer is a technological answer. That's why I mean, the engineers are involved, but I don't see those as the major players. Their thought process isn't exactly the same that can kind of take in the big picture. So for me, it's as simple as that, and it is global, and because it's global, it means everyone really, we've got to get along.
Everyone is aware that in architecture school it's about a 50-50 split in terms of gender. The numbers for minorities are abysmal even in school, but they are definitely better than what's represented in the profession itself. Where are we losing people? What is happening? Where are people losing their way along the path from school to the profession, to licensure? And if we're only giving them one path, chances are good it's not inclusive, it's not equitable. And there are efforts going on, and I would love to become more involved in them and force us as an organization, AIA Austin, to really take hard looks at how we consider qualification to occur, how it gets built up, how it gets executed.
Out of all the important issues that we are facing as a city and as a country, diversity is the biggest thing that I think that we need to conquer, and help people of diverse backgrounds and elevate them into the profession and help them have an equal footing.
There are a lot of really important things that our profession is facing these days, but I think the one that I'm sitting in the middle of squarely right now is the discussion about service in the community, and not just individually. In our firm, we've always encouraged and promoted the people who work in our office to get out in the community and do some service. We do work with service organizations frequently, but there's something bigger. We need to, as a profession, be more involved with what's happening in the world around us. We can't be taking a passive seat in the biggest things that are affecting our cities for generations and the planet. So I think it is organizing and using that organization not just to fulfill our personal needs within the profession, but in service of the community around us. It's part of our charge as licensed architects, and it's something that we need to take a lot more seriously.
I think one of the things that we have the most control over as architects is scale. And I think right-sizing a building so that we're reducing the amount of materials we use, we're reducing waste, we're there's less building to heat and cool, there's more room to expand the space in the future as needs arise.
So everyone's talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as a Latina and a woman in architecture, that is definitely something that is very important to me. But within that topic, what I would like to focus on more is getting the people that are not necessarily part of the minorities involved in the conversation. I think that is a very critical part of the puzzle that still needs to happen and still needs to be solved. And ideally, you know, at the end of my career, I don't want to be known as a great woman architect. I want to just be known as a great architect. So getting to a point where diversity is appreciated and it's just the norm. But it's not something that we necessarily have to go out and differentiate.
We're really concerned with the cost of living here. And I think there's a few reasons why. One is just a really basic one for what it means to run a small business and recruit talent and keep up with salaries, is just trying to make sure we're paying the people who work for us a wage that means they can live in Austin, and we're seeing that get increasingly difficult. And that's, to be totally honest, different from when we were starting out, and this felt like a city that really lent itself to entrepreneurial, experimental culture, and part of that was affordable cost of living. So we're seeing that change, and of course that ties into the work that we do around missing middle housing and zoning reform, and sort of understanding what all the different levers are in play that affect that cost. So locally, we feel really urgent about a sort of land development code reform that would allow us to build in more creative ways and have more creative conversations about how we build and create places for people to live and thrive.
I mean, I look back on my career and my primary interest has always been housing. It's generally been comfortable housing for somewhat affluent people. But I think it's what happens in the house that a container for all that can happen in a house is what is so fascinating to me, and getting to know the user and figuring out that unique solution. So housing in that realm has been where I earn my bread and butter, but the bigger issue now in our world is housing and how to solve it. And I think, how do we take those comforts and bring them into mass production, quick mass production no less. I mean, they're just, I don't think I'll ever tire of being fascinated by how people live on Earth in different cultures. It's so interesting in just housing alone. But the challenges facing our globe are so extreme right now that I think architects just have to stay working hard, because it's how it all fits together. Housing is just one of them, and environmental issues are monstrous as well. But you know, I think we are great problem solvers and great contributors to a better Earth.